So it was, in light of my earlier comment, it was suggested that I should introduce myself in Welsh. And I don't really need to introduce myself because George did such a great job. But just because I can, I'm going to. Prynhawn da, Leigh White dwi, dwi'n gweithio in Ixiasoft, dwi'n mynd I siarad DITA Open Toolkit PDF plugin. The most important language in the world. I will get right to it because there's a lot to say and I'm not going to get through all of it. But yes, the new edition of DITA For Print for OT 2.x is coming out in a couple of weeks. I'd hoped it would be out by now, but I missed the deadline by a little bit. So it'll be out soon. So you can order it from XML Press. And the first thing I want to do is issue a really quick apology for any of those of you who followed my advice in the first edition to copy entire style sheets into your plugin. That had worked for me really well in the past, and it all fell apart between 1.8.5 and 2x. So I sort of backed myself into a corner, and I think the documentation that Roger was talking about even says what Leigh said, yeah, don't do that. So if you did that, I'm really sorry. I have retracted my statement in the new edition of the book. I'm not going to talk about any of the 1.3 stuff because we all know there's new processing, new style sheets and all that for 1.3. That's there, and it will not interfere with updates because, of course, it's new. So what has changed the most between 1.8.5, which I'm sort of using as the base version for comparison, and 2.x is, of course, specific files, commons.xsl, which I call the kitchen sink of style sheets. Quite a few changes there. Links, tables, root processing, and the VARs file. So if you, just sort of a red flag, if you changed any of the templates from these files, there is a fair chance you will have to redo some of your changes for 2.x. There's also a fair chance you won't. All of this is sort of dependent on exactly what changes you made to the base PDF plugin. So you may have almost nothing to do, you may have a lot to do. Yeah. So one of the first things that you will have to change, almost regardless, are the references to the insert variable template. That has changed across the board to get variable. It's used all over the place in the plugin. For now, it's just a warning in your log file. It will not break your build, but at some point it may break your build. So go ahead, beat the rush, find and change. That's the old syntax up top, the new syntax on the bottom, and as you can see, just a quick search and replace will fix all of that. The DITA version tests, we found syntax similar to what you see up top there in those 4 files. Testing for particularly bookmap related stuff because bookmap did not exist in DITA 1.0. So if any of your templates contain this test still, that will break your build. So those tests need to be found and removed. OT 2.x assumes you are using DITA 1.1 or later. If you're still using 1.0, yeah, you're like a dinosaur. So anyway, you should not need that test. So take it out. The process task template has been deprecated. It occurs in task elements. Again, it's not an error for now, just maybe a warning. And there's some other templates too that have been deprecated. I didn't list them all here, but they're all indicated with a particular message. DOT, I forget the number, but they'll all show up in your log file. So if you start seeing those sorts of messages in your log file, go find those templates and either replace the references with the new proper names or refactor however you need to. The localization variables versus strings. So if you've worked with maybe an HTML plugin and a PDF plugin, you realize that there were these variables files that were specific to the PDF plugin, where you put all of those localization strings for notes and the task section labels. And then there were the strings files, which had a lot of some of the same strings or variables, but were more specific to the HTML type transforms. So that created some redundancy and some need to define maybe those variables or those strings in more than one place. So the PDF plugin is being refactored now to basically be able to allow you to define these strings in one central place that all of your transforms can use. And so one place where you can sort of see the transformation in progress is in the task elements style sheet. So for all of the task sections, context, prereq, postreq, etc., you'll see some verbiage like in the middle bullet there, where it's set up to look first in the variables for a string named, for example, task prereq, and then secondly, to look in the string file for a string named task underscore prereq. So it's sort of out of the box will accommodate this particular string being defined in one place or the other. So if it finds it in a variables file, it'll stop there. If it doesn't, it'll look for it in a strings file. And there's another template at the end of task elements that does that work. So, you know, again, the variables for now are working as they always have, but they may transition to strings. So you can consider just beating the rush on that as well. Or you can consider creating a separate sort of just little variables plugin that all of your other plugins can tap into for definitions of these localization variables. If you were transforming FrameMaker DITA documents and you were using the sort of legacy FrameMaker syntax, that's gone. So if you still need to do that, you can do it with a pre-processing step. Font specification, who alluded to this earlier? Was it Yarno was talking about? No, Robert was talking about fonts earlier this morning. If you're not using FOP, you don't have to do font mapping anymore. FOP still requires it, at least for now. But if you're using Antenna House or XEP, you can call your physical fonts directly from your attribute sets. So for example, you don't have to do the first thing and then have a separate font mapping file in your plugin. You can just call it directly from the attribute set, and then you can add a new parameter to your integrator file in your plugin that basically says, I'm not using font processing, don't look for a font processing file, just read it directly from here. So just one less sort of intermediary step you have to follow. All of the style sheets are now using XSLT 2.0. They sort of did before, but now they really all do. And what that means is there's just a couple of things that aren't used anymore, like node set, and you find that in the files I listed there. The XSL sequence, it replaces many of the XSL copy of and XSL value of instructions. And just to be aware of, if you were using XSL value of before, now you just need to know that as is, it's going to output all the items of a sequence. So you're going to need to maybe fine-tune some of those with an operator that specifies just select the first one, if in fact you only want the first one. So behind the scenes stuff that you may not notice is that, well, there's no more stage 3.fo. So if you had anything in your custom plugin that depended on doing something to stage 3.fo, you'll need to change that so that it now does whatever you were doing with stage 2.fo. And it's probably pretty rare that you do, but maybe. And those two targets I list there are deprecated. And one pre-processing change that was made was that chunk comes before move meta entries. So if by chance you have anything in your plugin or your pre-processing that depends upon the old order, you may need to refactor that to reflect the new order. If you, in 185, there were quite a lot of files that had _.xep or _.axf suffixes, which meant that those style sheets or attribute sets were specific to Antenna House or XEP. It was all rolled in together. Now all of the XEP and Antenna House and FOP specific stuff has been split out into its own plugins. So you can do one of two things, I guess. You can still keep any of those attribute sets or targets in your one plugin, or if you kind of want to keep reflecting the actual organization of the defaults, then you can extend those new processor-specific plugins as well as extending the base or DITA PDF to plugin. Or you can keep it the way it is if you want to just keep things simple, which I usually do because I like simple. And keyref processing now happens before conref processing. So again, if your plugin depends on the reverse order, then you'll need to revise that or refactor that, however is appropriate. How much time do I have? Like none? Oh, okay. So those are the major things to look out for. In the past couple of months, I've updated some of my plugins. I've updated some plugins for customers, and those are the things that have just kind of come up over and over again that I've typically had to change. As I said, it's very dependent on what you have customized. So you may run into many other things I didn't list here, depending on what you did. And I'd actually kind of like to hear about it, because I'm just curious to know what people do with their plugins and what kind of issues they run into. But real quick, I'm just going to note a few new things that are not going to be a factor with updating your plugins because they're new. But there are things that you may have done your own sort of funky customizing before that is now rolled into the plugin, which you may want to take a look at and see if the default way is better than your way, and think about doing it that way. Now my battery is very low. There were some parameters in the past that if you wanted to set them at the plugin level, then you had to add topic.fo.xsl or specific parameters from it into your plugin. And now a lot of those parameters have been moved into basic settings. Many parts of which in basic settings you're going to already be incorporating into your plugin. So now you can do some nice things like set the TOC levels and stuff like that more simply. Back cover generation, this is nice. Before you always had, if you wanted a back cover, you kind of had to roll your own. Now it's just there, and it's very simple, very easy to turn on or off. So take a look at that and see if what they did is better than what you did. And then you can get rid of your stuff and just go with the default and make it easier to upgrade in the future. Yes?
That's one thing that you did describe how to do in your early edition of your book.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious to hear how the way the toolkit does it now compares to the way that you advocated in your book.
Pretty similarly. And in fact, I took my custom stuff out of the new edition and deferred to the default because it's just easier. It's there. Just use it, right? But it was a pretty similar approach. Oh, thank you. There's easier control. In my book, I had a couple of topics about how to turn front and back pages off if you didn't need them, and it was a little more complex, and now it's very easy. Again, it's just a couple of parameters in basic settings. easier control of page numbering. So instead of having to hit a whole bunch of different templates, now it's all in there's a bunch of new attribute sets you can use for that. Page sequence easier, links, figures easier to split out, whether you wanted the just the number and the title, or just the title. Automatic line numbering for code blocks, which is really cool. Letter headings and bookmarks. You can apply separate formatting to the first column of a table easily now. And any quick questions? Okay.
I think everyone wants to have lunch, maybe?
All right, everyone's hungry.
Thank you, Leigh.